When the Fellowship journeyed through Moria, they encountered the unthinkable, a Balrog, ancient demons of fire that were amongst the deadliest of Morgoth's servants. The Balrog of Moria, known as Durin's Bane, was eventually killed by Gandalf, at the cost of his own life. But was he the last Balrog? Could there be more of them out there? Like many things in Tolkien's Legendarium, Balrogs went through plenty of evolution. In his earlier writings, Balrogs were far more numerous, numbering in the thousands. Although still deadly, they were far less powerful. You can glimpse this in the Fall of Gondolin, where characters such as Tuor and Ecthelion slay several Balrogs each, and dozens of others are slain throughout the course of the battle. However, during later revisions of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien decided that Balrog should be far more powerful, counting them as part of the Maiar, but as a trade-off, they should also be far less numerous. In fact, in a note found in Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien stated this: there should not be supposed more than, say, 3 or at most 7 ever existed. 3 Balrogs are definitely accounted for. One Balrog is Gothmog, Lord of Balrog's High Captain of Angband, he who killed both Feanor and Fingon. He was killed during the Fall of Gondolin. Another unnamed Balrog also took part in the Fall of Gondolin and attempted to ambush the survivors while they escaped. He was killed by Glorfindel, but not before he dragged Glorfindel to his own death. And finally, we have Durin's Bane, the infamous Balrog who haunted Moria and was finally killed by Gandalf. That leaves 4 possible Balrogs whose fates are unaccounted for, and assuming they didn't die during the First Age, they could have fled as well. In fact, there's a quote from the Silmarillion that supports this. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth. The word few obviously implies that Durin's Bane was not the only Balrog that fled during the War of Wrath. It implies that he was not the only Balrog to find some hiding place deep beneath the earth. So was Durin's Bane the last Balrog? According to the Silmarillion, almost definitely not, provided those other Balrogs lasted into the Third Age. But there's a problem. You see, the note where Tolkien stated the number of Balrogs was written after the material that appears in the published Silmarillion, so the quote that states that the few Balrogs managed to flee actually comes from a time when Tolkien envisioned the Balrogs as numbering in the thousands. However, you don't get that impression in the Silmarillion because any mention of the number of Balrogs was not included, especially in the Fall of Gondolin chapter, which is heavily cut down. You can actually read the Silmarillion and still assume there was only between 3 to 7 Balrogs. What this means is that the idea that a few Balrogs escaped the War of Wrath isn't necessarily true, because it was written before Tolkien changed his mind about the number of Balrogs that existed. And unlike some chapters in the Silmarillion, Tolkien did not go back and change the War of Wrath. Funnily enough, in similarly outdated writings, in multiple versions of that exact same passage in the Silmarillion, it's definitively stated that all the Balrogs were destroyed. Obviously not the case, but it was thought so at the time. We can actually see a similar thought process in regards to Balrogs in Tolkien's development of the Fellowship of the Ring. In Tolkien's earlier drafts of the Lothlorien chapter, Celeborn's dialogue is far different to the final version. A Balrog. Not since the elder days have I heard that a Balrog was loose upon the world. Some we have thought are perhaps hidden in Mordor or near the Mountain of Fire, but naught has been seen of them since the great battle and the fall of Fangorodrim. So in this version, it's very much assumed that multiple Balrogs are still around, just hidden somewhere, probably in Mordor, specifically Mount Doom. But in the published version of The Lord of the Rings, any reference to multiple Balrogs is removed. Alas, we have long feared that under Caradhras a terror slept, but had I known that the dwarves had stirred up this evil in Moria again, I would have forbidden you to pass the northern borders, you and all that went with you. And if it were possible, one would say that at the last, Gandalf fell from wisdom into folly, going needlessly into the net of Moria. In this version, Celeborn comes across as a lot more hysterical, indicating that the Balrog is a far bigger deal than what it is in the original drafts, where he simply waves it off and goes, "Yeah, we thought there were some of them still around, and this is where they probably are." One last major reference that Tolkien made came in Letter 144, written in April 1954. The Balrog is a survivor from the Silmarillion and the legends of the First Age, so is Shelob. The Balrogs, of whom the whips were the chief weapons, were primeval spirits of destroying fire, chief servants of the primeval dark power of the First Age. They were supposed to have all been destroyed in the overthrow of Fangorodrim, his fortress in the north, but it is here found, there is usually a hangover, especially of evil, from one age to another, that one had escaped and taken refuge under the mountains of Hetheglin, the Misty Mountains. It is observable that only the elf knows what the thing is, and doubtless Gandalf. Now, I don't think this letter is overly spectacular. It doesn't definitively state one thing or the other, but one thing I think it does emphasize is the Balrog's individuality, and once again it highlights the fact that they were all supposed to have been destroyed, and the fact that one survived is a pretty big deal. Alright, so what does this all mean? Was Durin's Bane the last Balrog? Well, here's the fun thing. It's kind of up to you to decide based on whether you believe there were 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 Balrogs in total. Even if you ignore the quote from the Silmarillion that states that a few escaped on account of that quote being outdated, it still doesn't change the fact that as many as 4 Balrogs were unaccounted for. While Tolkien's later edits do seem to indicate that he was leaning towards Durin's Bane being the last, nowhere does he state that it's definitely the case. And adaptions have already taken advantage of this loophole. In The Lord of the Rings Online, one of the first raids ever released was called the Rift of Ner'zghashu, and the final boss is an imprisoned Balrog named Tharlak. And in Shadow of War, you actually fight a Balrog that was dormant beneath Mordor named Targaroth. Funnily enough, this was one of the least lore-breaking things in that game. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. Sorry if the conclusion seemed sort of rushed in this video, I kind of got to the end of the script and sort of realised that I was more just bringing attention to something rather than making an actual point, which is what I've sort of been doing in my past Middle-earth Mysteries videos, but hey, there's no rules in Middle-earth Mysteries. Cheers, farewell, and remember, be a post-Silmarillion Balrog, not a Silmarillion Balrog.